Redditors related to a psychopath. What is your creepiest holy sheet, I might get murdered story? My aunt has 2 kids, both adopted, and all I know about their bio moms is that they were drug addicts. One of them, we'll call her Jane, is my age, and we were always really close, but her older brother, John, never really hung around us to the point that I barely knew him, even though I spent a ton of time at their house. Anyway, when we were maybe 12, Jane, my sister, and I built a massive blanket fort in the basement and were hanging out in it. John was maybe 15 at the time and I don't know why he originally came in, but for some reason he decided to mess with us by taking a large kitchen knife and randomly stabbing into the fort. We were trying to crawl away, but he could hear us and followed to whatever section we were in. I'm not sure if blindly stabbing at your relatives can ever really be playful, but this was not it. Jane was screaming at him to stop, and my sister and I were crying. It was terrifying. Finally, my aunt heard us screaming and came down and yelled at him. John claimed it was just a joke and said we were having fun. He's now in the middle of a 25-year prison sentence for murder. My little brother tried to stab me so hard that the knife stuck in the floor and neither of us could get it out. Parents eventually came home, and guess who got in trouble for provoking bro into almost stabbing me to death? Parents need to stop blaming the older siblings for younger ones' outbursts. My little C's isn't necessarily psychopathic, she's a fairly normal young girl. But once a week or perhaps once a month every now and then she'd have rage-fueled outbursts where she'd kick, scream and punch me repeatedly until the screams alerted my mom and she'd come running and scold me for it. I don't do anything. I simply look at her sometimes and something that's been bothering her the entire day hits her all at once and she goes berserk. She's only 8. Finally she showed the same treatment to my mom and brother when she stopped coming to me after I very lightly slapped her for hitting me repeatedly. It ducking hurts okay, and well, who did my mom believe for being innocent the entire time? That's right. Just because they're young doesn't mean they don't duck up. Sometimes they're just ducking crazy. Edit. My most upvoted comment is me talking bad about the only little sheet I love the most in my life. I kinda feel bad. I had several with my brother, but the worst was when I woke up to him sitting on my chest with his hands around my throat. He was trying to choke me, but his hands were too small, and he didn't get the pressure right, so I ended up with a giant hickey around the entire front of my neck instead of death. All because I ate the last nutty bar. My mom was 19 when I was born, and we had a very close relationship when I was little. She was always more of a friend than a mom, and that's just how our relationship was. Before my stepdad, I was always sarcastic all the time, and we joked around a lot. One morning my mom asked me to take the pizza boxes from last night's dinner out to the garage, where we put the cardboard recycling. I jokingly told her no as I gathered up the boxes to take them out. I took them out, put them on top of the stack of other cardboard, and turned around to go back into the house, and I bumped into my stepdad who had come in behind me without me noticing. He then proceeded to lift my 13-year-old body completely off of the ground by my throat and pinned me against the wall of the house. He got in my face and was screaming at me about disrespect. I remember flecks of spit getting on my face. My feet were back on the ground, but I was still pinned, and his hands were around my throat. I was able to get one of his hands in my mouth, and I was biting and scratching him. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got to school. The next thing I remember is sobbing in a private ensemble room in the bank hall. My mom still doesn't believe me. Over the next 2 years he continuously got worse and permanently destroyed my relationship with my mother. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow when he was home. I started running away and doing drugs. Eventually my behavior became bad enough that my mom sent me to live with my biological father. Life is better now. I'm safe. I still have the occasional nightmare and cannot stand any sort of confrontation whatsoever, but I'll be okay. Not me, but my cousin, 11 at the time, was caught smoking and skipping school by my mother. My mum told him she didn't care about him skipping school because his mother wouldn't have cared, but told him not to smoke by her car. He didn't like being told what to do, so he grabbed my brother, 2 at the time, by the hand and walked him out into the middle of the road by a blind corner. He sat my brother down and told him not to move. Then he walked away. Luckily, a neighbor had seen what had happened and grabbed my brother before a car could hit him. That cousin is now in an Indonesian prison, possibly facing the death sentence for smuggling drugs. By the way, dreams really do come true, I guess. Edit. Context. I'm tired and left out my cousin's childhood aspiration to be a drug lord, then forget I didn't write it in. That's what dreams really do come true, I guess is referring to. I had a cousin who tried to force feed me drugs, literally trying to hold my mouth open and put a powder in. It turned out to be amphetamines, so not really something a murderer would use, but I have always remained distant since. That dude has issues. I didn't think my sister would murder me, Paresi, because she enjoyed abusing me too much to straight up kill me, lol. One of the biggest things that sticks out from my childhood growing up with her abuse was occasionally if I was sitting on the couch, back of couch facing kitchen, she'd come up behind me and run a butcher knife along my shoulders and neck until I turned around and realized she had a knife. I think she just enjoyed the fear in me realizing what was going on. That look of oh my god, that was a knife. Why the duck do you have a knife? My sister did shit like this my whole childhood, and even after she was 19 and I was 17 she'd do crazy shit like throw a knife across the living room at me. If she was mad enough at me, I cut contact with her as soon as I was able to leave at 18. My then 15-year-old cousin tried feeding my sister, then 5, and I, then 9, rat poison. My dad has NPD and is generally an emotionless asshole. When I was in middle school I stepped on a stick in our yard and a piece broke off in my foot. My dad is a software engineer and used to go on site to build databases and help switch patient data to digital through the 80s, 90s, zeros. It gave him a real complex about not being a doctor and he stole tools and little pieces of equipment and would wear scrubs all of the time. It also meant he refused to take me to the ER for a super simple thing. He heated up a pair of medical scissors and cut the heel of my foot open while pretending to play doctor. At several times my mom opened the door to tell me to stop screaming so she could hear her phone conversation. My little brother would set things on fire in the house and hid knives under my bed. I literally thought he was planning to kill me. The worst part is, when I told my mom about it, she would tell me all boys his age do this, like really? I have a cousin who I always knew was kind of crazy. We live in a major city and he never leaves his family's apartment. He just stays in the apartment drawing and playing games. But even though he's weird I didn't really mind, because he's usually very sweet and wouldn't hurt a fly, or so I thought. When I was in college, I took him and my friend to see a concert. We got pretty drunk, and when we came back we were hanging out in his living room. His parents were out of town. He started drawing in his little book and I asked to see it. Turns out he was drawing me sitting there. It was an extremely detailed and accurate drawing of me. I flipped through the book and found all sorts of cool creatures and landscapes until I landed on a drawing of his brother, dead and mutilated. An extremely detailed drawing. Turn the page. My dad, dead and mutilated. Turn the page. Me, dead and mutilated. Quietly, my cousin says, did you find the drawings of the family? I was in shock and disbelief. What the duck is this? Why the duck would you draw our family like this? He says something like, I think about it all the time. I think about killing you and the rest of them all the time. My friend and I look at each other, frightened and silently planning on how we are going to get out of there. Our shoes were off and our stuff was downstairs. He could see we were upset. He looked disappointed, like we were trying to upset him. Are you scared? And as he said that he moved to the kitchen, you had to go past the kitchen to get out of the apartment. I was really worried that he was going to get a knife and try to stab us or something. I said haha no, they're really good. Was just surprised at first. They're really impressive though. I had to basically placate him into thinking I was okay with the drawings so that he would let us leave. He never did anything like this again, but he gets really weird and creepy whenever he drinks or smokes weed. I told my parents about what happened and they just kind of shrugged and said wow that's weird. Apostrophe. Not a family member, but my mother dated a crazy person after her divorce. We moved into an apartment and he moved in with us not long after. He had long hair and blue eyes and a beard, and was the spitting image of white Jesus. And he took it to heart after a few people told him about the resemblance. He pulled me aside one day and told me that he had a secret and he wanted to tell me, but I couldn't tell anyone else because the government was looking for him. He confided in me that he was in fact Jesus Christ and that he escaped from a government facility after being captured in 1964. He said he escaped with the help of the Pope during his visit to the USA. The Pope's private security force broke him out, and once he was free the Pope advised him to blend in with regular people. He said the Pope told him to not draw any attention to himself. So no miracles. And tell no one. But he trusted me with this information. Jesus Christ was a roofer, in case you were curious. He constantly carried around his roofing hammer and one day it went missing. Jesus lost his sheet. He locked my mother, my girlfriend, and myself in our apartment until it was found. This lasted 3 days. I was 18 at the time and was much larger than him and would have had no problem physically removing Jesus from our apartment, but my mother insisted he was having a mental episode and if I hurt him or did anything it may mess him up even worse. Turns out he left the hammer, which is really pretty much a hatchet, at a job site and a co-worker drive over to return it. I sat there like an idiot and watched this guy hand a ducking axe to this lunatic and did nothing. Big mistake. Our 3-day-long lockdown turned into 5 days. The final 2 days was this illiterate nutcase attempting to read aloud from the Bible, getting maybe 1 in 5 words right. Remember in school, when the teacher would have people read aloud and go around the room and there was always a dude you knew couldn't read 4 sheet and his part would last 10 times longer than everyone else's part? Imagine that for 48 hours. Jesus would only let us eat bread and water, and the bread ran out quickly. There was a lake outside our apartment, and on the 5th day Jesus was looking through the blinds at the lake and called me over to him. He confided in me again. He said, "You know I could walk right across that lake and right up into heaven." I replied, "If you do that I'll follow you anywhere." "Go for it, man, I would love to see you do that." My plan was to get his ducking ass out of the apartment and lock the door so my mom and girlfriend would be safe. And pray to this guy's dad that I can run faster than him and make it to a payphone to call 911. He looked at me with his crazy ass eyes and said, "You trying to get me caught, motherfucker?" I said, "No miracles." He raised up his roofing hammer and told me the only way I was following him anywhere was in the afterlife. It was at that point I thought, I'm going to die, and then he is going to kill my mother and girlfriend. I came to the sudden realization that I no longer cared if Jesus' mental breakdown would be affected by me beating the shit out of him or not. That was no longer my problem. Mid-rant about some religious shit about 2 inches from my face, I swung as hard as I could and punched him right in the sternum. He still had the hatchet cocked over his shoulder, like someone throwing a football, so the blow caused him to lose his balance and fall over a dining room chair. He crumpled in a heap and my mother, ever the cool head, screamed at me for hitting him. I had knocked the wind out of him, and he was gasping for air. My mother assumed he was dying. I would learn later in adulthood my mother was not the brightest light bulb. My girlfriend booked out the door with me closed behind. After grabbing my mother's arm and dragging her out of the door, I called the police and they came and got him. Last I heard he was in a hospital after he locked himself in a bedroom still saying he was Jesus. He was committed after he used a metal throwing dart to pick veins out of his arm. Never did get to see him walk across that lake though. When I was about 11 or 12 and my brother around 6 or 7, I was woken up one night by my mom jumping on/over me like a flying tackle. I had a pedestal bed that had enough room between it and the wall for walkways on both sides, and she came out of there with my brother and an axe. My brother and I had separate bedrooms, mine at the very end of the house and his just 5 to 10 feet from my door. Her bedroom was at the far end of the house. She had woken up suddenly and had the urge to check on us. When she got to his room first in the hallway, she saw his bed was empty. When she walked into mine he was standing over me, 1 foot on either side of my body, with the axe raised over his head. He was standing still and staring at me like he was trying to decide if he was gonna do it. She sprinted in and tackled him off me before he could do it. That was the first in a long line of insane incidents with him, and it's been about 18 years since. I have a cousin who used to kill neighborhood cats as a little kid. One day he just up and left. No one has seen him in about 13 years. My younger brother, who I'm still living with, has about 2 months ago started to get very aggressive towards his classmates, and has also been kicking our dogs and things like that. My parents have tried to punish him, but the only way they feel as if they can get through to him is through spanking him and whatnot. He has told me all this does is make him more angry, and about 2 days ago he told me, "You're pretty unlucky you don't have a lock on your door some nights. I also wake up to weird noises in the hallway connecting my room to his, so yeah, that's worrying." Update: they went to a therapist and they believe that he may have depression and some form of social anxiety. I do know that's a pretty quick diagnosis, but I trust the therapist and her opinion. He should be getting some more therapy for it, and medication if he can get it. Thank you all for the advice and help in the situation. I grew up with an abusive father, both emotionally and physically, although he dialed down the physical abuse when I was around 11 to 12, due to the fact that my golden child older brother had learned the ways of abusing me, physically as well. Anyway, when my parents got divorced, my brother went to do a year at a boarding school, so guess who was left alone with an emotionally abusive father who'd just lost his wife. His abuse increased exponentially, and it was of course even worse after I had spent the weekend at my mom's. People who've experienced abusers know that it is all about being in control. When my parents got divorced, my father insisted that me and my brother kept living with him. My brother went off to boarding school and my father lost his job, plus the house we lived in was too expensive, so we had to move out. That's a lot of control to lose for an abuser, especially on top of a divorce, so you can probably imagine the abuse was at top level. One weekend I was at my mom's. I fell very ill with the flu, so I ended up staying for a week. Then Monday the deal was I went to school from my mom's, and after school I would come home to my father's. I was so sad at going back to that place, but back then I had no idea what abuse was, or that my father and brother were abusive. I was 13 at the time. My father wasn't home, so that was nice. He didn't come back before I had badminton practice, so I made myself some dinner and went to practice. I was home around 9 PM, and my father was absolutely ducking furious. He yelled and screamed at me, demanding to know where I had been. And before I could answer he went on and on about how he had called everyone and no one knew where I was, and the deal was I was to come straight home from school. Completely shocked and baffled, I told him I had badminton practice, as I have had every Monday for almost 3 years straight, and it always ended at 9 PM. There was nothing different about tonight. Then he got even more mad at me, because I never told him when I was going anywhere, and he screamed at me that if it was always on Monday, then I should write it on the fridge calendar, and all his misery was my fault, because I couldn't even think enough to myself that I had to write it down, and he screamed at me for so long I can barely remember what else he berated me for. It left me completely hollow. I went to my room and just sat in silence, trying to understand why he was so mad at me, and I felt so ashamed of myself, a bitter side effect of an abusive upbringing. Then, after a few minutes he came charging up the stairs, barged into my room, and said, "Get in the car, we are going for a drive." In my 30 years of life, I have never ever even come close to being as scared of dying as I was when I sat in that car, waiting for my father to get in. He just started the car and started driving. I cannot describe it. I was so sure he was going to kill me. Turned out we were just going to see a house he thought of switching to. He even got mad at me for not asking where we were going. I don't talk to neither my father, brother, or mother anymore. To preface this, I have to share a bit of background. An aunt of mine had serious psychopath tendencies, coupled with depression and a few other things I'm sure. Anyways, she was cutting my uncle's hair, who was going bald. He liked his hair cut short, but there to still be hair. Well, she set the clippers a bit too low and shaved a massive chunk of his hair off. We are talking damn near skin level. My uncle reacted how you would think, slightly pissed but just laughed it off. Well, my aunt took offense to this and decided to get the scissors out and chop the ponytail off her own head to try and make him feel better. She did this in front of me in a different room than my uncle. Me, not knowing what was going on, started laughing. She went hysteric and started swinging and jabbing the scissors at me, trying to get my hair, supposedly, till my uncle finally restrained her. Swear to God, I thought I was one lucky jab by her from dying. TLDR, aunt messed up shaving my uncle's head. She overreacted to her own mistake and chopped her own hair off. I laughed. She lunged and jabbed at me with scissors.